World's Valentine's Day, and I am sure you are aware many around the world take time to appreciate each other with flowers and messages of love. However, I want to raise some concerns on a relationship that I am sorry I do not have flowers to say very good things on red roses on messages of love. Mine is a message that you have not been fair to us. And these were the words that were probably used by Raphael Tuju as he wrote to the judiciary. Let's just look at some of the concerns that were raised. Now, the Jubilee Party wrote to the Chief Justice, David Maraga, accusing the judiciary of bias. In the letter written by Party Secretary General Raphael Tuju, Jubilee says they are concerned with the verdicts issued by the courts under the leadership of Maraga, citing numerous examples that you've just seen. Now, here is Tuju explaining why the party has revisited the judiciary.
It's a very polite letter, if you've read it, very, very polite, calling on all of us to understand the interdependence of the three arms of government. I always liken this to teenagers who say that I'm independent, Dad, don't tell me anything, I can run my life. And then 2 hours later they ask for money to go to the mall. The judiciary is independent, but to a point. Independence is not absolute, because the judiciary also rely on the executive, the police force, and everybody else to be able to do their work. Parliament is independent, but Parliament should also be aware that, for example, if they refuse to pass the budget, even they will not get their salaries. So each branch of government does have some independence, but it is within a context. There is interdependence, and this even applies for countries. If you go to a place like the United States, it's an independent country, the most powerful country in the world. But most of their treasury bills, or not most, but a significant amount of their treasury bills are held by China. So to that extent, they are dependent on China. Okay. China is also the same. I mean, it depends on the US for their market. So all of us are dependent on each other. And so it is more of interdependence rather than independence. And sometimes when you try to assert too much of your independence, it shows an amount of immaturity in understanding how institutions should relate.
All right, so the 14th of February was a day where many were celebrating love, but not a lot of love between Jubilee and the judiciary. And the letter was certainly raising certain issues. Let me start with you, Mark. Your thoughts on that letter, first of all, from Raphael Tuju, citing some things that he felt were a bias from the court.
Before I answer on Tuju, let me contextualize what Tuju is saying. First and foremost, if you look at everything that the president has done ever since he named his cabinet and named CASs and did various changes within the security docket, within the dockets of the judiciary, and now within writing this letter to the judiciary, you will realize that Jubilee and the president indeed is reimagining how statecraft is done in this country. If by the time you're moving this many people in your second term, you're basically creating a totally different machinery as was there before, meaning Kenya as we know it is shifting significantly. So the question, however, is shifting to what? One would imagine that the president has certain goals that he wants to meet. Now, in that particular perspective, it must be understood that you cannot significantly change a nation without the cooperation and incorporation of the judiciary. If, for example, you want to fight corruption, you do need to incorporate the judiciary, and you need to have some common ground. However, if the judiciary is conceived or imagined to be pro one side, then the government would be worried and would write that letter. What I am grateful for is Raphael Tuju is not writing as a lawyer. It is not a case. It is his opinion. Now, but that opinion is backed by a letterhead called Jubilee. Therefore, the question must be not what is the content of the letter, but what is the progression after the letter. The question must be what conversation must happen between the judiciary and the executive so that they do not seem to be at loggerheads, because Kenya as a nation cannot afford such a circumstance. What needs to happen is, as the president is re-engineering Kenya, he needs to incorporate, just as Tuju has said, he needs to bring together the various arms of government to be able to deliver to the Kenyan people what is the Kenyan dream. And that's what is not being articulated very well in all these changes. There's a lot of movement, a lot of moving pieces, but no one is being told what exactly are we building. It's sort of like when you walk into your house and suddenly your wife has rearranged the furniture. The purpose for the rearrangement of the furniture is so important in the human being's ability to digest change. So what Jubilee needs to do now is probably paint a picture for the nation as to what it is they want to build. Otherwise, what they will attract in every step of the way is confusion and questioning, because we really do not understand what all these movements are geared towards. For example, the inclusion of Tuju as an as a cabinet secretary without portfolio. Is this his work? Is that what he's going to do? Those things need definition. Without definition, you cannot have form.
All right. Kevin Osido, let me come to you. And your thoughts on whether this is the right direction to take, given that previously, we've had politicians literally just lash out on institutions with no evidence. They just basically make statements and lash out. But this is now an official complaint, as it were, with facts, according to Raphael Tuju, which the CJ can choose to respond to. And there's clear direction in terms of this is what I'm pointing out as our grievances.
Mark, this is shocking to me. But it was the
content of the letter, or the fact that it was written, or
the fact that it was written. Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, the content is, in my view, still again, because Kenyans expected, especially when His Excellency the President said that we shall revisit this. But to me, the question is not to discuss the letter. It is about the future of this country, because this is a direct attack to the independence of very key institutions, especially the judiciary.
But why is it viewed as an attack yet? It's upon the CJ to respond to those. They're clear. They are clearly indicated.
That's right. But you see, it's not just about the CJ. The CJ represents an institution.
Precisely.
And he has either the wherewithal to respond or not to respond. Mm-hmm. But how the non-verbal is communicated to the public is the most important concern to me, to the fact that we expect to see some good working relations between, and Mr. Tuju was right in his presentation to be talking about dependence and interdependence, because that is what our constitution says, both even for national and county governments, that we'll be able to be dependent and also interdependent. But then if you look at the context, because this is of course coming up out of the election that was nullified and voided, and the comments that came up after that, and Kenyans are very well-mannered and good-spirited people, to the extent that we are very resilient to be able to take up heat, absorb it, and move on from there. But that movement is not to be seen to be always reminded about the bad things that have been done. This country has very many good things that we need to be talking about. Okay. But to this extent that, therefore, why I'm calling it an attack is because we know that probably Jubilee is looking for an opportunity to ventilate, which probably the kind of people that Mr. Tuju is talking about, that you almost burnt down this country. And the realization, therefore, should be that this country is, yes, we are working towards that unity, we are working towards that spirit of cohesion, that cohesiveness among Kenyans. But it is factual that our elections really present serious divisions, which therefore each and every institution should be working towards, bridging those gaps and helping Kenyans to not necessarily accept to move on, but to find avenues and opportunities to build this country. And this kind of documents, I think, are taking us back. They are more or less reversing the gains that we are making day by day. Because, Mike, even as we are seated here, there are people who are out there at 3 o'clock talking to people in Bomet, Marsabit, Mandera, to be able to live together as Kenyans. And so when powerful officers like Mr. Tuju write these kind of documents, I would have hoped that he would write a document to say, we want you to go out there as you visit counties to look at how your judges are engaging, speak to Kenyans to accept our Big Four agenda, so that we support the spirit of nationhood, national development, and not to take us back, because this, to me, is backtracking.
Javas, your thoughts on that, because depending on which side of the script you look at it from, there are those who feel that, like he says, it's an attack. There are others who say this is the mature way to handle things, because rather than just make statements, sweeping statements against institutions, then make an official complaint which the person who you have accused has every right to respond to and has the facts and figures with them on their table.
Mike, the question to me this morning is not why Mr. Tuju wrote that letter. Question to me is, who was holding Mr. Tuju's letter, hand and pen when this letter was being written? Because it's possible that he did not write this letter all by his own inspiration. And then he goes on to say that the letter is very kind and polite. Then Mr. Tuju should actually drink deeper from the well of politeness, if that letter actually is very polite. When Baron de Montesquieu made and advanced propositions about separation of powers all over the world in matters governance has made and continues to make the world even better, without which I think the executive fiat would stifle and choke off even operation spaces within democracies. I think Honorable Tuju too should find time and impress himself with very good writings by H.L.A. Hart and even R. Dworkins on matters discretion of institutions of government, especially the judiciary. Now, he needs also to appreciate that when you look at matters discretion and independence, yes, he needs to bring himself to the attention of institutional independence and discretion that the judiciary has, decisional independence and discretion that the judiciary has. If he appreciates what actually decisional discretion means, then he would know that he needs not chastise the Chief Justice and the entire judiciary in the manner that he has. Looking at point 1 of his letter and point 5, in fact, point 5 is even more worrying, when he says that the Attorney General, in his humility as government, wrote to an approach to the judiciary. Really, in his humility? Look, the judiciary is an arm of government. And they must work, yes, with cooperation and interdependence. That interdependence does not depend on the charitable advice of Honorable Tuju. Remember that Honorable Tuju, as of now, before he takes office as a cabinet secretary without portfolio, does not have oath of office and constitutional mandate. Yes, he's obliged, according to Article 3, Sub-Article 1, to be part as a Kenyan to defend the Constitution. But the kind of dress down that he has given to the Chief Justice, I think it is something that needs to be indicted of him. The other thing is that I think Honorable Tuju needs to be made busy. His portfolio, a minister without portfolio, is making him have too much time in his hands to come up with too many naughty ideas.
Maybe that is his portfolio to actually now, represent Jubilee and government in some of those areas where they're unhappy.
Exactly, but look, when a Secretary General of a political party indicts and speaks to the Chief Justice using such words as, the judiciary nearly burnt down this country, I think it is improper, inappropriate, a bit uncouth, if you ask me. And it is a letter written without absolute respect to the person of the Chief Justice as the holder of and head of the judiciary. It also demonstrates that there is a bit of high-handedness in the manner in which Jubilee as a party, and also, Honorable Tuju, looks at the institution of the judiciary in its entirety. This kind of scorn, and when you look at the kind of philippics that are littered through that Tuju letter, it is something that should not have us smile even a little bit about the direction we're talking about that this country is headed.
Okay, Mark, in terms of direction and your thoughts on what this might be, the president is on record saying we will revisit the judiciary based on some of the decisions they made. Could this be the revisit? Also looking at the organization and changing of sensitive positions. Is this a revisit?
My honest hope is that it's not a revisit. Because if we are to create a country of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, then we will all be toothless in short order. We will all be eyeless in short order. It would be my hope that this is not the direction that the government wants to go. I do not think it is helpful either to Jubilee or to the nation for them to be in a controversy with the judiciary. I do not think it's helpful at all. It will not deliver, it will not yield much fruit. However, I hope this is a platform for a conversation. It is my hope that when Tuju was writing that letter, it is a platform for the judiciary and the executive to have a conversation about that interdependence that Tuju is talking about. If that is the case, then Kenya is headed in the right direction. But if the case is confrontation, the fact of the matter is this, that in a confrontation between the judiciary and the executive, I promise you it's the Kenyan that will lose. Because what will happen is we'll have more and more litigations from the opposition, which would assume that the judiciary is a branch of the opposition because the executive is against it. And then now we will be in a litigious bind where the government will be incapable of doing anything because the opposition will always be in court. But that said, we must also understand, and this for me is key, and we're missing what is the overarching narrative in this particular story, is that, guys, Kenya is transforming. What is a cabinet secretary without portfolio? What is that? That is a clear message to tell you that how the cabinet has been arranged before is changing. How political parties have run government before is changing. A cabinet secretary without portfolio, who is also secretary general of a party, that and this same party has ousted 4 chairmen within parliament. That tells you that Jubilee as a party is very serious about how it's organizing and reorganizing itself. To what extent it is doing that and to what effect it is doing that is the story we need to be discussing. What is Jubilee doing?
All right, Kevin, you want to say something there?
Yeah, the challenge we have with what my friend and brother is talking about is the challenge that most Kenyans have. To be able to pull out a government from a political party. Because we must be very deliberate not to run governments as a party. A government is a machinery. A party is a small structure, in my view. And in fact, we should not be scared to say that it's the same party that closed down its offices a few weeks ago. And so what Kenyans expect to see is how do we transform the agenda of this party that came for elections to be able to respond to the needs and aspirations of Kenyans, because that is not what we are seeing. We are seeing that politicking moving on to governance. And that is why it's about a few people that are supposed to be speaking on behalf of the many, but these many are not feeling their voices being heard. So there is that gap. So in my view, I would have, and that's why I said that I would be much more happier if Mr. Tuju transformed these sentiments into asking questions that relate to the big 4 and how Kenyans will be able to fill them. Housing issues, manufacturing in relation to youth unemployment issues in this country, health service delivery in relation to doctors' strike, issues to do with food security vis-a-vis putting ugali on our tables and unga prices skyrocketing. Today, mafuta imeenda juu. How does this party that came for elections transform to be able to form a government that meets my needs?
All right.
And in terms of response to the CJ, I don't know, but probably I wouldn't be surprised if we received a resignation letter from the
the
CJ and saying,
well, that would be...
I think
That would
this
be
is...
sad. A quick correction, though. Jubilee has not closed its offices.
What happened?
No, the offices are still there. That's a fact. As
Okay.
in the offices are still there. And that being said, you're absolutely right, because the question I keep asking myself, and what Kenyans should ask themselves, when there's significant changes in state offices, it is not the individuals that make the story. It is what is the head of state in general doing. The question we need to be asking Jubilee is, as you're moving the furniture of the country around, how will our house look like when it's done? In questions, as you correctly put it, in questions of the Big Four, in questions of how we're developing, in questions of how are you even interfacing with county governments. These are the questions that we need to have. And the biggest problem we have in this country is we keep splitting hairs while we are forgetting what is the bigger issue. If indeed what is happening in the judiciary is an indicator of what Jubilee wants, we must quickly begin to ask, what does Jubilee want?
We should be loud to
yes.
the things that make Kenya better than the things that fulfill our
Javas,
selfish.
as we are running out of time, maybe you want to comment on that, but I also want us to look at the reopening of Parliament before we wind up. But you wanted to say something on that.
Well, basically, when I look back during the Kennedy years in early 1960s, first with the Cuban Missile Crisis and what came to be known as the Bay of Pigs, that crisis defined the presidency of Kennedy. And he emerged out of it even a stronger, more respected leader. Now, if I were to juxtapose that with the kind of situation, a challenge of government and decisions that need to be made by government, with what is happening in Kenya today, the honors is on His Excellency President Kenyatta. When all these things are happening below his nose, is his eyes open? Are the president's eyes open or closed? And even as, remember, that's his party. He's the head of that party. If his party has written such kind of letter, has the president authorized, or is he at peace with that letter and the approach it has taken? The silence of the president will speak volumes, and also the manner in which he intends to react or guide his party and his government, because he's the head of the executive, in all these matters will again redefine and reposition him in the future history about what is it that a president, first with various challenges of governance, etc., internally, was able to rise above such ashes and be a remarkable leader that even posterity will want to shake hands with him.
All right, Mark, as we're concluding and as you include your closing comments on this, your thoughts on the current parliament and members of parliament that we have. Are Kenyans being represented?
Well, definitely one half of Kenyans who voted are being represented. The other half have chosen to stay away from parliament.
Are they being represented by, especially when we see like the executive has a hand in what's happening in parliament with the Jubilee party?
And that's what I'm saying. Jubilee, how it has begun to do things, you must study it carefully. When you see an executive that is keen in keeping control of both houses of parliament and keeping the parliamentarians in one line, you should ask yourself, to what end? I'm very sure the issue is not wanting certain chairmen to be chairmen of commissions. I'm sure there's an agenda that Jubilee has, and we all hope that agenda is the Big Four. That is what our hope is. That being said, the fact of the matter is even that executive, the decision that it's making was voted for by a certain proportion of Kenyans. And therefore, that is your representation. That is what you chose. The question must be asked, is there a place for the minority? Is there a place for the opposition in this country? That is the critical question. My sadness comes from the fact that 9 cabinet secretaries were nominated, 9 passed. Okay? My question to myself is, was that vetting or rubber stamping? Because the issue is this, that when you are vetting someone in a public exercise, it is not a must that you vet them to failure. It is a must that you vet them to exposure, meaning that had we had a diversity in the vetting, had we had varied voices within Parliament speaking different stories, maybe we would still have had the same cabinet secretaries, but today we'd be sitting here and talking about what we can trust to have been a thorough vetting exercise. And this is good for both Jubilee supporters and NASA supporters. What is lacking in our country within Parliament and within Senate is the voice of those people who should represent the minority and the opposition. It is a dignified position, and one of the things that we must get to as a country is disagreement does not mean disenfranchisement.
All right, I need us to close. Your closing comments.
Well, I'll say this, that when NASA legislators elected to abscond various parliamentary duties, and especially including not taking part or participating in the vetting of cabinet secretaries, it was an open invitation to all Kenyans to the theater of political absurdity in the next 5 years. And whether individuals are supporters of NASA or Jubilee, we must come to one firm conclusion, that when you have a responsibility and you willfully and conscientiously elect not to take up such responsibility, then it is an absolute disregard to those who gave you that honors.
Kevin, 30 seconds, wind up, please.
Mine is to appeal to the President, Mheshimiwa Uhuru Kenyatta, and the former Prime Minister to speak together, to have a discussion around this country. Because as one is calling people to the house on the hill, probably chances are that the other one is calling people to Capitol Hill to say, forget about it, let them do whatever they want to do, because we saw that happening in the first year of the Jubilee government. And so mine is to appeal to both of them to put Kenya first, put Kenya forward, and let's talk about the good things that are happening, and let NASA stop this hypocrisy that when it's about our salaries, we run to Parliament to discuss. And when it is about Kenyans and how laws are supposed to be passed, yes,
it's a totally different story.
The majority, tyranny of numbers, will have its day, but can the minority also have their say and way?
All right, thank you very much, Kevin Osido, Mark Bichachi, and Javas Bigambo for joining us this morning on a Week in Review. And that's where we wind up this segment of the show. But do stay with us. On KTN News, we continue. We've got some entertainment news coming up.